Hi everyone, Heather here with Astrology with Heather.com, and I am back with another special video. And today's topic is Chiron in astrology and what it means to have Chiron in each of the 12 astrological houses. And so in today's video, I'm going to start with a general discussion on Chiron and what it means astrologically, the symbolism, the mythology, and how to piece that all together to understand Chiron as an astrological influence. From there, we're going to get into the energy of Chiron in each of the 12 astrological houses. And the reason I'm choosing to focus on the houses instead of the signs is because Chiron takes a long time to transit each of the 12 signs because it does have actually a 50 to 51 year orbit. And so it's going to be more of a generational influence in the signs as opposed to a more personal influence, which is going to show up more so in the houses. And then finally at the end, I'm going to discuss some additional resources for Chiron and other resources for beginners. So if you're interested in learning more, definitely stick around until the end of this video. All right, and so without further ado, let's get into it. So first off, what the heck is Chiron? So Chiron is an asteroid, a comet, a dwarf planet, a planetoid, a centaur. It's all of these things because it's had all of these classifications throughout from the onset of its discovery in 1977 until now. They've struggled in the astronomical community to classify and determine what Chiron actually is. But Chiron is basically a body that's out there in space. Its orbit actually lies between Saturn and Uranus. And in astrology, we look at it more as an asteroid or a planetoid or something along those lines. But it's actually pretty difficult to figure out what the actual designation is because it's had so many different designations. And so I refer to it as an asteroid. I look at it as an asteroid, but it's actually a more potent asteroid in terms of its influence than some of the other asteroids that we look at in astrology, like Ceres and Pallas and Vesta and Juno and all of those other ones. In fact, I think there's like 400 something asteroids that are used astrologically, and you can't really use all of those. That would just be insane. Your readings would be like 3 weeks long. So I focus on the ones that we have the most information about and the ones that have been supported through my research and through my experience in working with charts in terms of their influences. So I use things that have been verified through experience, that I know that these interpretations work and that they're useful in some way. And Chiron, in terms of the asteroids or planetoids or, extra non-planetary bodies that are floating around in our solar system, Chiron is by far the most potent, or at least the most useful. It might not be the most potent. There might be other asteroids that might be very potent. We just haven't discovered enough about them yet. But in terms of the actual influence and the way that it shows up and the information that we have, because it's been studied so intensely, Chiron seems to work. And especially because I'm somebody who is very interested in, who practices medical astrology, Chiron is useful. It doesn't always represent a physical type of experience or a physical type of illness, but it is related to psychological and emotional trauma that can manifest in the physical body as illness. And sometimes there is that association with illness. And so let's get into what Chiron actually represents in the astrology. So Chiron, in order to understand Chiron in the astrology, we have to kind of backtrack and look at Chiron's mythology. It isn't always the case that the mythology of the namesake of the planet or the asteroid or whatever body that you're looking at automatically translates to the interpretation. A lot of times we'll get new bodies that are discovered in the solar system. They'll be given a name, and then astrologers will just rush to look up the mythology and attribute that mythology or that archetype to that that asteroid or whatever that thing is that was discovered in outer space. And it usually does not work that way. And even if it does sometimes work that way, at least to a certain extent, it could be that you don't have a full understanding, or that there's additional information that you're not picking up on that's very important. And so a lot of times that doesn't work. And so really we have to, when a new body or a new object is discovered, as astrologers, we really have to put in the work, do some research, look at how it actually affects people, especially when the transits come in to and from that new extraplanetary body, that new planetoid, that new asteroid, or whatever it is. And then from there, determine what the influence might be. And that's something that's been done with Chiron since 1977, since it was discovered. It was actually given its name quite quickly. And so astrologers really jumped to create an ephemeris and start looking at the influences. And so there is actually a great deal of really solid information out there about Chiron. And so going back to Chiron's mythology, Chiron was a centaur, and he was the most evolved of all of the centaurs. He was this really powerful healer, and he was the one that went around and healed all the other centaurs. And so with Chiron, what ended up happening was he got into a battle, and he was shot in the leg with a poison arrow, and I believe he was shot by Hercules. And so he was shot in the leg with this poison arrow, and he was in so much excruciating pain. It was completely unbearable, but he was not able to heal himself. And so here he is, this really powerful healer. He's supposed to be this evolved creature, or this evolved being. He's more human than the other centaurs, and he has this extra level of understanding, and he feels like he should be able to heal himself, right? Because that's what he does, and he just can't do it because it was this like special poison arrow. And so he feels really ashamed of that, and he has to endure like a couple thousand years of really intense pain. And eventually he begs the gods for mercy. He begs the gods to allow him to become mortal, so that way he can be human and he can just die. And so that basically, it's not the happiest story, but it tells a lot about Chiron in the astrological influence, because Chiron as an asteroid shows us where we have some innate wound, some innate insecurity, some vulnerability, shame, or past trauma. And it could be physical, it could be spiritual, it could be psychological or emotional, or it could be a combination of all of those things. But there's usually this innate guilt or this innate shame that we feel, or this vulnerability we feel around the Chiron energy. And it shows us where we're only human, right? And so we might have to reach out to others for help. We might never fully resolve these issues, but through that process of working toward healing and creating a better experience and working through the issues that Chiron represents in our chart, we learn how to help others and guide others through similar experiences. And so it's that healer, heal thyself energy. And there are a lot of really strong Chiron placements in the charts of really incredible healers, especially in the alternative healing community. Because another thing Chiron represents is herbalism and more traditional forms of medicine, which nowadays are considered to be more alternative. And so when you see Chiron really strong in somebody's chart, and that person is like a doctor or a healer of some kind, or they're a psychologist, or they do something in the healing arts, it's usually going to be something that's a little bit outside of the mainstream or outside of the allopathic Western model of medicine, even if they incorporate that model somewhat. And so you'll see that really strongly in the charts of the best healers. And usually these healers have had to go through a healing crisis of their own, where they were sick or they were injured or they had to overcome something. And that is what led them to become a healer. And that is what led them to show others the way. And that's one of those energies of Chiron. And even if you are not in the medical profession, that doesn't mean that you can't utilize that Chiron energy to help other people to heal in some way. In fact, you almost have to. And so that Chiron energy will show you where you show up to lead others by example, or through actually deliberately and intentionally guiding them through some sort of process. And so examples of that could be if you have Chiron maybe in the 3rd or in the 11th house, and you were bullied. The 3rd third house is early education. So maybe you were bullied by your peers. Maybe you were a little bit slow to learn some things. And later on, you can help to mentor or guide students who are going through a similar experience. Same thing could be said for maybe the 11th house. That could be another energy with certain placements that could have been bullied or made fun of or picked on by their friends or groups of people. And so that's another place where later on down the line, you can learn how to help and guide others who are going through that experience. And so that's part of the energy of Chiron. In order to fully understand Chiron in your chart, you shouldn't just look at the houses. The houses will provide a layer of information and a little bit of context in terms of what area of life you're experiencing this Chiron shame or wound or trauma, or that you have experienced this Chiron trauma, but it's not necessarily going to give you the whole story. To get the entire story, you're really going to want to look at not just the houses, but also the sign placement, even though it's generational, because that'll show you a little bit more about how that energy is being expressed. And you especially really want to look at planetary alignments. And so by alignments, I mean aspects. So things like trines from other planets, sextiles, squares, oppositions, conjunctions. When there are planets aligned with Chiron, especially within a 2 to 3 degree orb, because it is an asteroid, it is a minor influence, I give it a very tight orb. But when you have a 2 to 3 degree orb, within that of an aspect from another planet, that planet is really going to give you a really important piece of the story to give you the whole picture. So you really want to incorporate all of these things. The other thing that you want to look at, in addition to the houses, is going to be the degree of the Chiron placement. And this is a technique I picked up from Robert Phoenix, who is a former teacher of mine, and he actually has a course on Chiron, which I highly recommend. And this is his technique that he developed. And so I'm not taking credit for this, but it works really well. And I use it in every single one of my readings when I look at Chiron. And so basically the degree of the Chiron placement. So if your Chiron, for example, is at 15 degrees, that represents the age in which the person had a specific trauma or crisis or difficulty that is related to the symbolism surrounding Chiron. So I hope that makes sense what I'm saying here. So if somebody has their Chiron at, let's say, 15 degrees in that third house that we referred to before, the third house represents things like peers and early education and your ability to kind of keep up with the rest of the students in your early educational setting can sometimes be shown there too. And so that would be an energy where maybe at age 15, that person had to take like a more remedial class, or they were picked on by their peers by not being, quote unquote, as intelligent, or not appearing to be as intelligent as their peers. And so that could have been a time where they were bullied, or where they were held back even a grade or something like that. I mean, this could show up in a lot of different ways. Again, you have to look at all the symbolism, but you would look at that age 15, and there would usually be something that sticks out that's associated with the symbolism. And the main thing with the Chiron moment, or that original Chiron trauma, where it's more predominant, is that there's usually a before or an after. In that area of life, represented by the house that it's in, there was usually it was usually that everything was one way before that age, and then after, everything was different. And so even if you can't pinpoint the exact specific thing that happened, you can at least usually see that, like everything was one way and then all of a sudden it was a different way. And there's usually some sort of shame or guilt or something like that, or vulnerability that's attached to that energy, where it's triggering when you think about it. It's triggering when it comes up again in a different way. And so that's part of that Chiron energy too. And so, that's basically the energy of Chiron and the way that I look at it. Sometimes these things, as I mentioned before, can manifest as physical illnesses, or they can be things that hold you back because you feel awkward, or you feel like you're not good enough, or you feel ashamed in some way. And so you'll see people sometimes who have these prominent Chiron placements, like on their ascendant or on their midheaven, where it's really out there in the open. They'll feel afraid, or they'll feel sort of ashamed to put themselves out there. And so they can have a difficulty in their career, maybe with that Chiron in the midheaven, these people can probably be really good healers in a lot of ways in their career, but they have a difficulty in putting themselves out there. There's a challenge or a difficulty or a vulnerability around dealing with people in positions of authority or being an authority figure, things like that. And so this kind of shows you, and that's just one of many examples, but it shows you kind of where you have, it's also an area where you feel kind of awkward. And I should mention that too, because you can feel like you're an alien in that area, or you're just strange in some way, or you don't quite fit in. And that's also part of that Chiron energy. If you look at Chiron in terms of what it actually looks like out there in space, it's all like misshapen and awkward. And so, that's part of that energy too. And that's also part of the energy of Chiron being born as a centaur and being rejected by his mother for being some sort of like monster or freak or something that was different, right? And so you might feel like you're a monster or a freak or somehow different in that area. And that might be a source of shame. And so those are the main influences for Chiron. Okay, and so for Chiron in the houses, I pulled up my little handy PDF cheat sheet so you guys can look at that. And I also have that, it's over there. I also have that available for a download, so I'll post a link down in the description below. It's a free download, so you can use this PDF as a little cheat sheet to help you remember the main significations for each of the 12 houses. But I have it up on my screen just because it would be a little bit easier to look at and follow along as we go through each of the 12 houses. And so for Chiron in the first house, this can be a shame or a guilt or a vulnerability or an awkwardness around the physical body and the physical appearance. That's a very common one. So body image issues, feeling like you don't look right or you don't look good enough or you're not attractive enough, maybe even being picked on or being made fun of for your appearance in some way, feeling like you yourself are not good enough, feeling shame or guilt or vulnerability around being selfish or acting on your own self-interest. That can be a big thing with Chiron in the first house. And this could actually, the same thing with like Chiron in any of the angular houses, but especially in the first and the 10th, these can be energies that show up for people who are really powerful or really prominent healers. Really, if you have Chiron in a conjunction also with like the sun or the moon or any of your personal planets, this can really indicate that you have a great healing potential. You have a great potential to show up and to help guide and heal others as a result of what you've experienced personally. But the first house is definitely one of those main energies where when Chiron's there, that person usually does have some healing potential when it comes to their ability to help guide others. But there can be, definitely some difficult early childhood experiences or early life experiences. There's a difficulty or a shame around your identity. And that could be a big thing too. So you might feel discomfort with who you really are and putting yourself out there. You might feel awkward. You might feel like you're very literally an alien and you don't belong in this planet, or you don't belong in your own skin. You don't belong in your own body. Those are things that can come up with Chiron in the first house as well. But this is an energy where you can help to heal other people on that, even sometimes physical level. Like there could even be like a physical issue with your body, and you help other people to cope and adjust with a similar issue as a healer or as a guide. It might not just be a self-esteem issue. It might not just be an issue where you feel unattractive or you feel awkward or something like that. There might actually be a physical issue with your body. And if that is the case, you're somebody who can help guide others and help lead others who have similar issues. With Chiron in the second house, there can be a guilt, a shame, a vulnerability, a trauma from the past, an awkwardness around resources and money and dealing with resources. You could feel shame around acquiring resources or spending money. You could feel shame around not having money or being poor, or maybe in your childhood, your parents didn't have a lot of money and that was a source of shame for you. There's definitely some sort of trauma or some sort of awkwardness or some sort of incomplete energy, like you don't feel like you're good enough or you don't feel like you have enough, or if you do have a lot, you feel shame or guilt around that when you have Chiron in the second house. But this could also be you making money as a healer or helping people to heal their own financial issues or financial hangups, or their beliefs around finances. That could be a big thing too. This could also be energy where there's challenges or difficulty around food. I've seen that a little bit because the second house does have that association with its material possessions. It's what you need to sustain your existence, and food can fall under that second house for sure. And so there could be guilt, shame, trauma, difficulties around food, food issues. The third house, as I mentioned before, could indicate early childhood issues, especially with learning and education. And so sometimes this actually could be a very literal learning disability. And I've definitely seen that come up before, where people have Chiron in the third house and they're dyslexic, or they take a little bit longer to learn language for some reason, or they have maybe a speech impediment or a stutter, or they have difficulties with certain subjects in school. And so they have to take a little bit of extra time or be placed in a special class. And sometimes they feel really ashamed or really, traumatized by that experience, or they're shamed or they're bullied by their peers or made to feel like they're not good enough, and they feel like they're never good enough as a result of that experience. But this is an energy where you can help other children, right, who have these sorts of issues, or you can help people who have difficulty learning and understanding things later on in life by guiding them through your experience. This could also be some sort of trauma, guilt, shame, vulnerability, insecurity that is related to your relationship with siblings or extended family members. There could be trauma there too, or neighbors or people in your immediate community. You could actually feel like you don't belong in your community, like you never feel that sense of community. You just feel like you don't belong. Anywhere that you go, you feel like you're an alien and you feel like you don't quite fit in. And that can be part of that Chiron third house energy too. Chiron in the fourth house. Chiron in the fourth house usually indicates an early childhood trauma or an early childhood shame or guilt or vulnerability, or some sort of shame around your parents or your upbringing. That could be a big thing too, or your ancestry. Or there could be like a very little trauma that occurred involving the parents, or maybe the parents said or did something that made you feel ashamed or guilty or vulnerable in some way. There could be also some sort of shame around your home and your place of living, or some sort of trauma around your home or your place of living. But a lot of times this is like stuff to do with the parents. And so there can be early childhood or even later in life, maybe if you have Chiron at a later degree and it's not until you hit age 29, it's at the 29th degree or something like that, that it really kicks off. Usually that energy will still be present a little bit prior to that, but there won't be like a big event or a big moment or a big ordeal until you hit that degree that we mentioned before for the Chiron moment. But it's usually going to be some difficulty around parents and childhood and all of that. There can also be sort of a shame, guilt, awkwardness, insecurity around laying down roots and starting your own family, where maybe you feel like you're not good enough to show up in that way, and that can prevent you from moving forward and starting a family, getting married, buying a home, laying down roots, doing those things, even if that's something that you feel like you want because you feel uncomfortable about it, and for whatever reason, based on whatever happened to you in your early childhood or in one of those experiences that we talked about. Chiron in the fifth house isn't quite as difficult, just like it would be like in the ninth house. I mean, Chiron, when it's in the houses where it's actually trining the ascendant, it's not going to be quite as awkward or quite as traumatic most of the time. And that's going to be the case with like any planet in the fifth or in the ninth house. It usually does have some sort of saving grace or some sort of benefit to you. And so especially if you do have Chiron in an exact trine with your ascendant and you have Chiron in the fifth house, this could be actually a really positive energy that indicates that you have a lot of healing potential. You could even be a healer of children. So like a pediatrician or somebody who works with children and works with childhood trauma. And that could be a really great outlet for you. But there could be some sort of guilt or shame or vulnerability or insecurity or awkwardness or feeling incomplete around, first off, your ability to just relax and enjoy yourself and experience play. You could feel really guilty and really ashamed when you do things that bring you pleasure. There could be guilt or shame around sex and around relationships, especially like love affairs and romantic relationships, not just like long-term relationships, but especially the sexual aspect of relationships. There could be some sort of trauma from your past or some sort of awkwardness, shame, or vulnerability that causes you to not feel right or to feel uncomfortable or to feel kind of like an alien in when you're dating or when you're in those types of situations. This could also be some sort of awkwardness, shame, or guilt around children and your ability to raise children or your own children in some way. And so these things could all be present there. But really, this is an area where you can help other people and guide other people, even if it's just your friends, to help them to understand their own experience, especially when they go through similar things. And so it could even be that maybe you had an affair and you hurt someone, right? And you have a deep shame about that, a deep guilt about that, and that sits with you. And it's one of those things that you feel like you don't even want to talk about because it just makes you feel so bad about yourself, like those types of things. Or it could be the opposite where you were cheated on, right? So those things can come up with that fifth house energy too. It could even be the parents in childhood too. That could be a part of it, especially if you have like an earlier Chiron placement. But these things tend to cycle and come back around later on in life in different ways. But Chiron in the sixth house, that is one that can literally indicate health issues. It could indicate that you were really sick early on in life or you had some sort of illness. It can indicate that you dealt with illness indirectly in some way. There could be guilt or shame around showing up as a caregiver or maybe not showing up in the way that you thought that you should. There could be guilt or shame or vulnerability around your own health and your own health issues. There could also be issues around food and nutrition that come up with Chiron in the sixth house. And it's usually, though, that there's like some sort of psychological or emotional issue. It could even be from like a past life experience. It doesn't necessarily have to be from this lifetime, but there's usually some sort of psychological or emotional basis to the health issues that come up. Although I have seen more than once Chiron in the sixth house indicating issues that you were born with. So kind of like inherited genetic physical or even psychological health issues. And so those things can come up with Chiron in the sixth house, but it could even just be something as simple as, you had a parent or a family member or somebody in your childhood who was sick and it was traumatic for you and you hold a lot of shame or guilt or you hold a lot of insecurity around that experience. And so that could be part of it as well. I keep feeling like I'm going to change something, but I don't need to. So Chiron in the seventh house. Chiron in the seventh house can bring up issues, insecurity, vulnerability, shame, guilt around relationships. Sometimes it's around a parental relationship. It could be that your parents split up when you were young and you felt like incomplete or you felt like an alien amongst your friends who had both of their parents together or something along those lines. That can be part of it, and that can actually bleed through into adulthood and cause issues and insecurities around adult relationships that you have, with romantic partners. And it can cause guilt or vulnerability or even difficulties in commitments. And so that's a part of it too. This also can sometimes indicate utilizing your partner as almost like a therapist or a healer in some way, or that your partner is actually a therapist or a healer in some way. That's shown up too quite a bit. And so it could be that you marry someone who's like a doctor or who's a healer, especially an alternative healer. Maybe they're an herbalist or something like that, or they do something in a healing profession. That could definitely show up too. This could also be a good energy for somebody who wants to work one-on-one with somebody in a healing profession. So if you yourself, you could be like a marriage counselor or a therapist or actually like some sort of doctor who's providing therapies to people working one-on-one to help them to heal issues that they themselves have had. And so that could be something too. And I've seen that show up for Chiron in the seventh as well. Chiron in the eighth house is a little bit harder. This is one where usually people understand that there was a before and an after in terms of the age where, the Chiron placement is, but sometimes people don't remember the exact experience. This is something where people might bury it. It might be too traumatic or too dark or too deep. Or it's something that they just want to keep secret. But this could be guilt or shame or vulnerability or a trauma around power struggles, around financial issues. This could be some sort of difficulty around fear or anxiety that stems from some sort of, early childhood experience or some sort of trauma from your past. But this is actually a really good placement for people who actually want to become healers, especially if you're a psychologist or you're working in some sort of like shamanic type of healing, something that's deeper and that's much more psychological and spiritually driven. This is something that could work really well. This could also be shame or guilt around something involving occult practices, witchcraft, astrology even. This could be some sort of shame or guilt around intimacy and sexuality. That could be a part of it too. I mean, sometimes that's more fifth house, but there is definitely some energy there in the eighth house as well. And this could be that you feel like you're not good enough when it comes to your finances. Maybe you have money that comes from an outside source, or when you grew up, money came from debt or from somebody else, and you felt ashamed of that, or your parents felt ashamed of that, and that bled through to you. Or, in adulthood, that could really be like you feeling awkward or uncomfortable with taking money from others or from the outside, like you have to work for everything. That could be a big hang up for Chiron 8th house people. But this is really, any planets in the 8th house usually indicate a really powerful, really good healer who can see things that are a little bit deeper and that are a little bit beyond the surface level, or a lot beyond the surface level. So that's what makes you so good at getting in there and digging deep and really understanding what's going on beyond just what you're seeing externally. Chiron in the 9th house can be some sort of awkwardness, shame, guilt, vulnerability, insecurity around higher educational pursuits or institutions, teachers, and your relationship with teachers. That can be a big one. This could also be a guilt or a shame or an awkwardness or an insecurity or some sort of trauma involving religion or religious figures in some way. That's definitely a big one with the Chiron in the 9th house. This could also be some sort of fear or difficulty or trauma around travel, or a really challenging, really traumatic travel experience. This is also, though, an energy where people can become teachers and they can teach other people, like healing professions or healing art forms, really easily. And so, that's a really good energy for Chiron in the 9th house as well. And if you are somebody who had some sort of traumatic experience or strange or awkward experience around religion, philosophy, your own morality and ideologies, especially early on in life, you're somebody who can really figure things out and help lead other people who are having some sort of spiritual crisis in a similar way, where they lose faith, or where something happens with a religious figure that causes them to not trust or to lose faith in some way. It can help other people. You can help other people to understand themselves and understand what they believe and how to practice what they preach a little bit more easily. So Chiron in the 10th house. Chiron in the 10th house, that's one where I started mentioning a little bit about the potential for that to indicate, or Chiron with the midheaven at least, to indicate some sort of shame, trauma, vulnerability, guilt, insecurity, involving people in positions of power and authority. And that could be a father figure, that could be either parent, that could be a teacher, that could be a principal, that could be anyone who is in a position of authority in your early childhood. Or if you have a later degree Chiron, it could be, in your teens or even your 20s, where you have this experience where maybe you're shamed, or you're yelled at, or you're humiliated by somebody who's in a position of authority, and it causes you to lose trust, or it causes you to not feel like you're good enough and you don't want to put yourself out there anymore. And so this is a big one where there can be difficulties with putting yourself out there. There can be difficulties with achieving high levels of success because of those insecurities and those past experiences. But this is also where you can help lead others to become confident and to become more secure in who they are, so they can put themselves out there once you've worked through your issues yourself. And so this can make you a leader. It can make you like a leader of leaders, where you help people who want to be in a more leadership position, who want to be more authoritative, who want to deal with their issues with authority, right? You can help lead them. And this could also be a really good energy for somebody who works, again, as a healer or a doctor or a psychologist or something along those lines. And that's something that you would put out there into the open. Not everyone who has Chiron in the 10th house will be working in one of those professions, but if you have other indications of it, then that can be a supportive energy that can indicate something like that. And then Chiron in the 11th house. Chiron in the 11th house is usually associated with bullying or being ostracized or feeling uncomfortable in groups of people. And so this is one of those energies where you really feel like you're an alien. You feel like you're an outsider, even when you're with your closest friends. And you feel like you maybe are always stepping on eggshells and trying to, not ruffle any feathers because you don't want the attention on you. This could be an energy where, you were bullied or you were picked on for some aspect of yourself, and you just felt like you didn't belong. And maybe maybe there are times that come up even in adulthood where you don't feel like you belong, even in your social circle, even with your closest friends, or maybe the insecurity is that you never really had a lot of friends, and that could be part of it too. But this is an energy where you can really help to guide others who are going through a similar experience or have gone through a similar experience. This is a really this is a good energy, by the way, for being friends with other people who feel like aliens or other sort of weirdos and things like that. I'm not saying that in a way like poking fun at people. Like, I mean, my friends are all like the outsiders, the fringe people, the weirdos and things like that too. But those would be the types of people that you would probably gravitate toward more so than people who are just kind of like normal, conservative, sticking to what society tells them to do types of people, if that makes sense. So people more that are on the fringe or who are viewed as outsiders, that would be more your social circle. For some people, this could also be a really great energy for hosting or coordinating some sort of group healing. So you're working on helping people to heal in group settings, group therapy, things like that. And that could be something that could be good for you if you have Chiron in the 11th house to actually engage in, to go to some sort of group therapy or something like that, a group healing session. And then Chiron in the 12th house. This one is, again, another one where people don't always have a clear picture of the exact circumstance or the exact situation, especially when it comes to that Chiron moment. There's usually, again, a before and after, but like the actual circumstances sometimes are lost with the 12th and with the 8th house specifically. And those houses are houses that are really hard to understand and to conceptualize for a lot of people. They do relate to some very physical, very real things, but they also relate to things that are hidden, that are secretive, that are more subjective and more perceptual, if that makes sense. And so the 12th house is the house of the subconscious mind. It's the house of dreams. It's the house of trance states. It's the house of your past life experiences can show up there too. And so this could also be an energy where you're in your past life, you were like a healer or something like that, and that comes up in this lifetime, or you can feel some sort of and this could also be an energy where you feel some sort of shame, guilt, vulnerability, insecurity around your fantasy life, because that's the 12th house. It's your imagination. It's what you fantasize about. It's what you dream about. It's what you daydream about. And that could be a source of shame, guilt, awkwardness. You could feel, a lot of times people who have that 12th house Chiron energy, they really do feel like they're like straight up aliens. Like they feel like they don't belong on this planet at all and they want to return to somewhere else. That I've seen a lot with Chiron in the 12th house. So there's this sense that you don't quite fit in or you don't quite belong, and that this earth itself is like not your home. That can be a big Chiron in the 12th house energy. And that could have to do with something with a past life experience, or maybe like literally you were an alien in your past lifetime and now you're here and you're on the planet Earth. Hard for me to say it's hard for me to know that for sure. But, I can speculate a little bit about that, I guess. But there could be some sort of guilt, shame, vulnerability, insecurity around your spirituality and your spiritual practices. But this is actually a really great energy for people who do forms of different like spiritual healing and energy healing and creative types of work. This would be a really great energy for somebody who does like art therapy or something like that, or teaches art therapy, or does some sort of spiritual or religious type of therapy or healing work, or like a faith healer or something. Chiron in the 12th house could definitely apply to that energy, but there's usually this feeling of being like lost and really just feeling detached from this physical reality. A lot of times people are daydreamers, and maybe that's a source of guilt or shame. Like you're not really here present in this moment, and you're always kind of like off somewhere else because that's where you feel most comfortable. There could also be a guilt, shame, vulnerability, or trauma specifically around isolation or being thrown into a period of isolation. There could be a traumatic experience involving a cult, like a cult, involving religious institutions, spiritual institutions, monasteries, temples, prisons, hospital systems, rehabilitation centers, all of these types of places. There could have been a traumatic experience or a period of isolation tied to those institutions or places that can stick out for that person, and that could be a source of trauma or a source of shame. So thank you all so much for watching this video. If you like this video, please like the video, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends if you feel like they might benefit from this information. And if you want to learn more about some of the basics in astrology, I have a couple of videos right here for you guys to watch next. And if you want to dive deep into the foundations of astrology, I have a full 16 plus hour course that goes through all of the basics and beyond, my foundational astrology video course. You can start it at any time, and it's actually available at a discounted rate right now. The link for that is down in the description below. And I am back with Tutorial Tuesdays. Hopefully I will be sticking with it this time, so every Tuesday, including next week. Check back and make sure you're subscribed to my channel so you don't miss another astrology tutorial, because I'm going to be teaching you guys about a lot of different really interesting topics in astrology. I've been listening to you, taking your suggestions, writing them all down, and I'm finally ready to put them out there. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye everyone.